with me to Matthew 24:24. For false Christs, that's false messiahs, and false prophets will arise and show great signs and wonders, okay, in Matthew 24. But in verse 15, we see, therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation, spoken of through Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, notice the activity of Antichrist is bifunctional. It is aimed at Israel. It involves the deception of Israel, and it involves the attempted deception of the church. Antichrist seeks to deceive Israel, national ethnic Israel, and seeks to deceive the church in every instance. Look at 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, please. Verses 1 to 4. Now we request you, brethren, with regard to the parousia, the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ, and our gathering, our episunagage, together to him, that you not be quickly shaken from your composure, or disturbed either by a spirit or a message, or a letter as if from us, to the effect the day of the Lord is come. He's speaking here to believers, some Jewish, most not Jewish, Gentile God-fearers. Let no one in any way deceive you. It will not come unless the apostasy that comes first, and the man of lawlessness is revealed, the son of destruction, who opposes and exalts himself above every so-called God or object of worship, so that he takes his seat in the temple of God. Revelation chapter 11, the millennial temple. You see, he's out to deceive the church. He's out to deceive the Jews. Revelation chapter 13. Verse 14 and verse 18. And he deceives those who dwell on the earth because of the signs which he was given to him to perform in the presence of the beast, telling those who dwell on the earth to make an image of the beast who had the wound and of the sword who's come to life. Again, we deal with this in Shadows of the Beast. He counterfeits the resurrection. Look at verse 18. Here is wisdom. Let him who has understanding count the number of the beast, for it's the number of a man, and his number is 666. Let he who has wisdom. Well, whoever those people are, if they had wisdom and there was a pre-trib rapture, they wouldn't be here either. It's only the people of God who are going to have that kind of wisdom. That involves a gematria, a Greek gematria, a Hebrew gematria, and things like this. You can get the book. But I don't have it completely figured out, but I do believe by the grace of the Lord, more and more people are seeing it clearer. And again, there's something for the church, something for the Jews. There will be a faithful constituency of believers within the church who will see through it. And there will be a faithful remnant of Israel who will see through it. But most of Israel is not going to see through it until it's too late. And most of Christendom are not going to see through it until it is too late. They won't see it until it's too late. Now, I just don't mean the nominal church. I mean people who profess to be regenerate, who profess to be believers. Remember, there are many antichrists. There are these two ultimate beasts in Revelation. But there's a spirit that's always been in the world that John spoke of. Yet this spirit gains momentum in the last days. It is happening now. How do we make sense of these things? 1 John says, love not the world, the cosmos. But it also says, neither the things of the world, the cosmon. The words are related. Cosmos, cosmon. The system of the world. The way the world works. Worldliness does not have to do with things. It always has to do with our attitude towards things. It's not about material possessions or wealth or anything. It's not to do with sex or power, or not to do with anything. Or culture. It's not to do with any of those things. But it is everything to do with our attitude towards those things. With our attitude towards those things. That is the cosmon. The cosmon sucks people into trusting in the cosmos, a fallen world. The cosmon seduces people into the cosmos. Well, let's look further. Someone sent me a clip this week, and it was on some web pages, that a teacher was in trouble, legally, for teaching historical facts about Muhammad, that he was a pedophile. There were criminal prosecutions in Australia about 5 years ago of a former Muslim, criminally prosecuted for stating the historical facts about Muhammad's relationship with Aisha, the daughter of Abu Bakr, which is in the Hadith, in Islamic literature. The fact that it was in Islamic literature, that it's in Muslim history, that it's in their holy books. It's your religion, it's what you teach. Did not prevent a Christian from being criminally prosecuted in an English-speaking democracy for pointing it out. This is insane, isn't it? This is insane. I'm only reading what's in your book because I'm offended. Well, you're offended by your book? How can a society think that's, forget about rational, forget about just. How can they think it is anything but ridiculous? Spirit of error. Spirit of error. In California, you can get in legal trouble giving someone a straw in a restaurant. Giving someone a straw in a restaurant because a Green Party political activist demanded a law. Okay. Now, the logical thing to do would be to get biodegradable straws, instead of plastic ones. But this is fine. And in certain cases, it could be even prosecutable. But you know what's legal in California? To register an illegal alien to vote, and they're there and they're in the country illegally and getting social benefits with no right to be in the country, taking jobs away from Mexican Americans, taking jobs away from Black Americans. But the state says we have to protect them in cities of refuge from being deported, even though they're taking jobs away from Mexican Americans. And from Black Americans. That's who gets hurt by it economically. Now, businesses love illegal aliens because they have to work below minimum wage. You've got to pay an African American or a Mexican American legal wages and benefits. You can pay these other people what you can pay them. They're just there to pay substandard wages to people, artificially depresses wages. Wait a minute, what about our own Mexicans? What about the Mexicans who were born here? We're going to give them a city. You can have a late-term abortion in California, a partial birth abortion. A baby capable of surviving, but arbitrarily aborted by dragging it to the birth canal with forceps, boring a hole suboccipitally through the skull, inserting a suction catheter, and sucking the baby's brains out. And it's legal. It's legal! But don't you give somebody a straw. Now you understand, this is California. This is where Silicon Valley is. This is the high-tech center of the world. Professing to be wise, they become fools. How can you be so stupid? Stupid as it is, it will become more like this. Become more like this. Let's see. Unelected bureaucrats and judges in Europe can tell you who you have to let into your country, set quotas on agricultural production and fishing, penalize the British farmer for having the most productive farms in Europe in order to reward farmers in countries with less productive ones. Drive the cost of manufactured goods and most commodities and consumer durables up 8 to 10% above what they would be otherwise. And you're wondering, should you stay in the EU? How can people be so stupid? Now, when the people weren't so stupid, go into crisis mode. Try Irish politics. In Ireland, they have referendums. Providing the political establishment gets the result it wants. If it doesn't, they hold another referendum. and sometimes a third one, and once in a while a fourth one, until the people have decided. Now they want to do it here, don't they? Another Brexit. What's happening? How is it like this? Telling people there's democracy where there is none. A country that votes Brexit obviously should have a Brexit prime minister. But no, you want a non-Brexit prime minister, and then she almost loses an election to the devil's son. Only the Northern Irish save Britain. And she's still the head of the party and the prime minister. A job she shouldn't have to begin with. Well, look, I'm not trying to be political, but why is this happening? There are forces of spiritual seduction on back of this stuff. I was just talking to someone. Forget about the Second World War. Forget about Napoleon or the Spanish Armada. The British quest to be independent of Europe goes back to Boadicea. You know that? It literally goes back to Boadicea. Unbelievable. Celtic Britain, like Cornwall and Scotland, most Wales, they were never part of the European Empire anyway. They were never part of the European Empire, the Roman Empire anyway. Never. Well, we know from Daniel there's something happening here. Let us see how the stage is being set. The 20th and into the 21st century has seen the rise of the most brutal, genocidal, mass-murdering dictators in history. Because of the Blitz and the Holocaust, people in Britain personify Adolf Hitler as the next thing to Satan. And I can understand that. But Joseph Stalin killed 2.5 times as many people. Some would say 3 times as many. Nobody is sure. Mao killed 40 million. 40 million! What did Mao, Joseph Stalin, and Adolf Hitler all have in common? They were all Darwinists, and they were all socialists. All Darwinists and all socialists. Nobody can deny that they were socialists. Nobody can deny they were Darwinists. And nobody can deny that it was in the name of those two things that they tried to lend rational credence to their actions and policies. That's what they did. For a number of years, you've heard me and maybe other people say, East goes west and west goes east. Federalism collapsed in Eastern Europe. The Soviet Union, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, these multinational states fragmented and broke up. The UK is on the precipice of breaking up. Scotland, Wales have their own, Northern Ireland have their own parliaments. Federalism is declining. Federal states in Eastern Europe. Socialism was seen as a failed experiment in the former Warsaw Pact nations. People in Hungary and Poland and Romania, they hate communism. They hate socialism. They don't want it. They know what it is. They know it didn't work. While people in Eastern Europe give those things up, people in Western Europe want to embrace them. Doesn't make a lot of sense. If it didn't work there, why is it going to work here? Latin America, Che Guevara, Fidel Castro, Hugo Chavez. Guess where they are now? What did they do? What did the Sandinistas do? Now again, I know about the abuses of capitalism. I know there's faults in every system. Man has fallen. But the fact that it's given the most personal freedom and the highest standard of living to the most people, despite its faults, that's not the issue. The issue is socialism has never worked because it is predicated on a Darwinist ideal. As capitalism came from feudalism, they said socialism would come from capitalism, and it didn't happen. Marx was wrong, proven wrong. Marx was wrong, proven wrong. Communism did not begin in Britain, the first capitalist country. It began in Russia, the last feudal country. Everybody knows that. But you weren't allowed to teach it in the Soviet Union. They had to engage in revisionism and rewrite history because it didn't fit the narrative. What I propose is this. The stage is being set for Antichrist in society, in Israel, and in the church. Let's begin. The narrative. You must preserve. That's not dark enough. You must at all costs preserve the narrative. It doesn't matter what the facts say. It doesn't matter what reality says. Only the narrative matters. Today, we call it Olenskyism. Barack Obama was an Olenskyist. Hillary Clinton, Olenskyism.
Let me introduce the speakers. We have first Dinesh D'Souza, who is the author of the forthcoming book, The Big Lie. He has produced and starred in Hillary's America and Obama's America. He has a 35-year career as a writer, scholar, and public intellectual, a former policy analyst in the Reagan White House. We have Ralph Benko from the Alinsky Center. President of the Alinsky Center has been called by a Washington Post magazine columnist the second most conservative man in the world for his widely recognized advocacy of the gold standard. And then we have David Alinsky, the son of Saul Alinsky and the chairman of the Alinsky Center, famed architect of a new kind of political strategy. So we'll start with the resolution. Let me pull it up here. Resolved that Saul Alinsky, the famous community organizer, was a revolutionary neo-Marxist, and many of America's problems today can be traced to the destructive legacy of Saul Alinsky, mentor to Obama, Hillary, and the so-called thuggish wing of the Democratic Party. And we'll start with Dinesh D'Souza, 10 minutes for that resolution. Yes.
Thank you very much. Always fun to be back at Freedom Fest. And today I have my work cut out for me. It's a very awkward topic for me to be debating because we're debating the Alinsky legacy. And right here on the podium is the son of Alinsky and also the head of the Alinsky Foundation. So I kind of feel like I'm debating the legacy of Don Corleone, and here's Michael Corleone up on the stage, as well as the chief consigliere of the Corleone family. It's a little bit awkward. I'll have to try to get over that one. At the first glance, it would seem very difficult to debate two people who are so intimately familiar with Alinsky. What could I possibly know about Alinsky that, let's say, his own son wouldn't know? But I think that if we look very much at the example of The Godfather itself, you realize that very powerful people can have one public life and a completely different private life. The Don, for example, was himself a family man, very devoted to his wife, very straight-laced in matters of sex, very devoted to his children. And so here my point is that being the son does give you a certain privileged position, but you're also not going to see the man as he relates to the world. You're going to see the man as he relates to you. And it's quite possible that Alinsky was a lovely family man, a devoted father, while at the same time in public life being kind of a gangster and a crook. Now, my case on Alinsky really relies on three links in a chain, and to defeat the case you have to break one or more of those links. The first link in the chain is simply to say that common experience tells us that the Democratic Party today is completely different from the Democratic Party of, say, 50 years ago. In other words, the Democratic Party today is not the party of, let's say, Harry Truman or John F. Kennedy or even Jimmy Carter. The Democratic Party today is the party of Obama and Hillary, to a lesser degree, the party of Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. It's a different kind of party, and something or someone made it that way. Now, that's the first link in the chain. The second link is simply to say, what are the distinguishing features of this new Democratic Party? The old Democratic Party seemed to be a patriotic party, generally committed to the same goals as most of us in this room, but the difference was over the means. What to do with American prosperity, for example, how to share it. Or, yes, America should be strong in the world, but is it better for America to be more or less interventionist? These were debates about means, but agreeing on the ends. The new Democratic Party, I would say, is characterized by three new features. First, a kind of rather systematic deployment of lawlessness in public policy. And so, for example, the immigration laws say one thing, but Obama does another thing. The Defense of Marriage Act says one thing, but he does another thing. Obama, in a sense, literally sees himself as above the law. The law is a tool. The second feature is a willingness to use the power of the state against your opponents. In other words, we live at a time where even the post office, the Bureau of Land Management, all these places have SWAT teams. And so for the first time, I think this new Democratic Party uses the power of the government, of the IRS, of the EPA, to not only enforce its will, but to bludgeon its opponents into submission. You get on the wrong side of these guys, they think nothing of sending the tax audit people after you. This is the new Democratic Party. And the third feature is enriching yourself by shaking down private corporations and the government. Obama and Hillary are both sort of global specialists at this. They figure out how to use leverage to public power to, in a sense, rent or sell public policy. And they also figure out how to enrich themselves enormously in the process. Obama was a community organizer, but you won't find him around any poor people these days. He's hobnobbing with the billionaire set. Bill and Hillary came to Washington, D.C., and despite having government jobs all their career, they have a net worth of $300 million. Even Saul Alinsky died, interestingly and tellingly enough, in Carmel by the sea. A community organizer who lives by the beach. And you may say dies to the sound of the waves. Now, this is the new Democratic Party. How did it get that way? I think the simple answer is it got that way, not entirely, but largely, through the influence of one man, Saul Alinsky, and the influence he exercised independently over Obama and over Hillary. So another key link in my chain is that Hillary and Obama were both at a formative time of life shaped by Alinsky. Now, Obama never knew Alinsky, never met the man. Alinsky died in, I believe, 1972. But Obama kept going back to Chicago. Why? To study under the Alinskyites. He even became a kind of Alinskyite instructor. And so I'm suggesting that he learned his scamming techniques from the Alinsky way. Hillary met Alinsky in high school, had a close relationship with Alinsky, brought him to Wellesley College where she was a student, was later offered a job by Alinsky. And so both Obama and Hillary, I think, at a key time of life, imbibed, you might say, the Alinsky Kool-Aid. Now I want to talk a little bit about that Alinsky Kool-Aid to see if it is recognizably the force behind, a destructive force, I would say, behind the America we live in now. Most people think that to figure out Alinsky, you got to go read the Rules for Radicals, because gee, there's the dedication to Lucifer in one of the opening pages, and that tells you all you need to know. I think that that book actually tells you relatively little about Alinsky. First of all, the dedication itself is highly problematic. Alinsky was an atheist, probably like a good many of you in this room. He didn't believe in God, and naturally he didn't believe in Lucifer. So why does a guy who does not believe in God or Lucifer dedicate a book to the guy he doesn't believe in? Clearly this is not about Alinsky saying, I want to be the devil. Clearly something else is going on. Remember, Alinsky himself embraces Machiavelli, and one of Machiavelli's key pieces of advice is not to play your full hand up front. And so you can be fairly safe in assuming that the Alinsky book is not going to be the full and true window into Alinsky. You have to look someplace else. Normally we would have no place to look, but happily, toward the very end of his life, Alinsky gave a series of interviews. This was in 1971, 1972, really concluding in the year he died. One was to Playboy magazine, a very detailed interview, and another one was to Harper's magazine, I believe. In any case, in these interviews, Alinsky basically said stuff that had never appeared in public or print before, and they give you a real window into Alinsky. The first thing he says is that from a very young age, I tried to figure out how I could get stuff for free. without having to work for it. And he describes with great relish a scam that he developed at the University of Chicago for eating in dining halls without paying. And not only, now a normal guy would be like, I pulled off the scam, I'm a very clever guy. Alinsky, and we see the Alinsky method kicking in right here, is he said, I began to hold seminars around the university to instruct other students in how they could eat without paying for it. In other words, I think this was the birth of community organizing in the United States. Alinsky then graduates from school, he goes on to college, he studies criminology. And very interestingly, he then gets in with a series of gangs. An Italian gang that he talks about, and then most significantly the Al Capone gang. And here Alinsky is very interesting because he talks about his interactions with the gang. At one point, for example, the Capone boys want to bring in an assassin from out of state to kill people, and Alinsky, far from objecting to the killing, objects to the high price of bringing in an out-of-state assassin. He tells the Capone guys, why don't we hire one of the local guys? They'll do it for less. Alinsky then tells Playboy in the interview, he says, you know, he goes, I really admired the way in which these gang members could shake down people and extract money and stuff out of them. The only downside is that every now and then they got shot. They got knocked off. So Alinsky goes, it got me thinking about how I could pull off a similar scam without the risk of getting knocked off. And then Alinsky realized that crime is actually very similar to politics. And so Alinsky realized, and again, I'm not divulging Alinsky's private thoughts. Alinsky says a lot of the things that I applied to community organizing, I learned from the mafia. That is not a direct quote, but it's a paraphrase of a direct quote. So essentially, Alinsky took the mafia's shakedown tactics, which is essentially up against the wall, pay up or we're going to get you, and brought them into politics. And here we have really the beginnings of Obamaism and Hillaryism. I want to give a simple example of how this kind of thing works, and that is, since we're talking about it, Obamacare. So many people think Obamacare was Obama colluding with the American people against the insurance companies. That's the public face of it. It's a very Alinskyite scam. Let's pretend that I'm on the side of the people fighting for the little guy against the big bad insurance companies. Now in reality, something completely different is going on. Obama is meeting behind closed doors with these same insurance companies and basically using threats and incentives to bring them over to support Obamacare. The threats are obvious. We're going to be taking over the healthcare system and it's going to look very bad for you if you oppose it. The incentive is more cunning. Obama says to the insurance companies, we're going to be forcing millions of Americans, including young people, lots of people who don't want insurance, don't want to buy insurance, we're going to make them buy it. And that's hundreds of millions of dollars in profits for you. So you have a carrot, you have an economic incentive in backing my program. So here's my point. This was smoke and mirrors. Obama is in fact in bed with the insurance companies, establishing government control over the economy, 1/6 of the economy, while pretending to be on the side of the little guy. This was really Alinsky's specialty. Alinsky's specialty was to indulge in the rhetoric of social justice, while in fact being about what he even talks about in his book, ultimately for him it's about power. It's about power. In this country today, there is a great fight over whether or not the entrepreneur, the creator of wealth, the people who actually work and make stuff, should they have the power? Or should an outside group of self-anointed bureaucrats and experts who declare themselves to be progressive, on the side of history, on the side of the future, do they get to kind of come in and take things over and deploy wealth ultimately for their own gain, for their own private gain? This is the Democratic Party that we have now. Frankly, if you don't like Trump, this is how we got Trump. The reason that we got Trump is the Democratic Party became a party of ruthless Alinskyeites. The Republican Party is a party of bespectacled gentlemen. And these gentlemen were constantly being thrown up against the wall, defenseless against the Alinskyeites. And finally people said, we need to have a little bit of a big boss and a little bit of a thug and a little bit of a guy who can throw you across the room on our side for a change. Remember how defensive poor Mitt Romney was about his wealth. Trump has far more wealth, but no one even criticizes him for it, because you can't criticize him for it, because the more you criticize him about it, the more he boasts about having even more than you thought. So we are now in a Alinskyite environment. Quite frankly, I admire Alinsky from a distance. He was a very scheming, clever man. He was an interesting man. And I think perhaps it is the accident of history, because he had no way of knowing at the time that his two proteges, Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton, both of whom seemed to have virtually nothing going for them at the time, in fact, had nothing going for them at the time, would actually reach the summits of power. But they did. And that's what put the Alinskyite method into operation. And it's a big legacy, although, I'm sorry to say, a destructive legacy. Thank you very much.
But Alinskyism is only Nazism. Goebbels did the same thing. Hitler's propaganda minister. Tell a lie often enough, and people will think it is the truth. Stick to the narrative. Forget about fact. Forget about reality. Stick to the narrative. You're pro-life. You're a misogynist. You're part of the war against women. Just keep repeating that. No, I'm pro-baby. Doesn't matter. You're against women. In the United States now, more women are opposed to non-therapeutic abortion than support it. We don't want to hear that. It doesn't fit the narrative. You're against women. Yeah, but these are women saying... 53% of American women voted for Donald Trump. We don't want to hear that. Doesn't matter. You're against women. You stick to the narrative. This was Pravda and Izvestia, the two news publications of the former Soviet Union. Pravda means truth in Russian, unbelievable. And it's Izvestia. Truth is not what actually happens. Truth is defined as a political decision by the party. Whatever the party decides is truth is truth. Wait a minute, abortion is killing the unborn. No, it's women's reproductive rights. It's pro-death. No, it's pro-choice. That's the narrative. We stick to the narrative. That's what happens. Second way this is happening. They understand this mentality. It's setting society up. Not only that, but texting. That kind of communication lends itself to sound bites, to cliches. You understand? It lends itself to mantras. So it becomes technologically facilitated, reinforced. Just go by just keep repeating this. Well, this gets in the church. We have the victory. We're going forth in triumph. Hallelujah. Now is the time of us to march upon the land. We're building a kingdom of power, not of what. No, you're not. Look at the newspaper. That's not the narrative. Yeah, but it's the mantra. You understand? Israel? The Jews have repeatedly ended up the proverbial man on back of the 8 ball. Goes back to Jacob. Very clever. He counter-maneuvered Laban. Resourceful. Yet he wound up in a dark night of the soul. It was only God's intervention that saved his neck. The Jews would have been wiped out at least 20 times. In the last 2,500 years, the Jews would have been wiped out at least 20 times apart from divine intervention. In the 1967 war, they thought it was because of them. No. It was because of God and because of the stupidity of Islam and the corruption of the Soviet Union who backed it. That's what happened. The glorification of Zionism and the glorification of Judaism. Now, I believe in the prophetic purposes of God for Israel and the Jews. I believe in Zionism, but I do not believe in the glorification of Zionism. And I certainly don't believe in Talmudic Judaism. But that's not the mantra. The mantra, Am Yisrael Hai, Am Yisrael Hai, Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael. No, Am Yisrael lies. It's God's undeserved grace. It's his promise to your fathers. That's why you have survived. The narrative. The all-encompassing narrative. The next way it works is education. Education, educa, co-equally comes from two Latin words. Educere and educere. Etymologically similar, but two different meanings. Educere to lead out, to prepare someone to go out and make it on their own, using their own abilities, their own resources, their own intelligence. Educere. But then there is educere, to mold, to mold. Educere is when you use education to teach someone how to think. Educere is where you use education to teach someone not to think. It is about conditioning. Now, this is not a new problem. Although state schools in Britain, called public schools in America, were established under Christian principles from the influences of early Methodism to give literacy and numeracy to working classes, that is true. They became conditioning plants to breed workers for labor-intensive industries. You understand? Don't think, just do this, dig in the coal mine. It was there. The teacher was like the foreman, the whole bit. Pavlov's dog, the bell rings. This is not a new problem. The elite, however, the children of the wealthy, had different schools. Grammar school, public schools. They were taught to be the managers, the entrepreneurs, the whatever. Today, educare, taxpayer-funded schooling in the United Kingdom and the United States is not there to teach people how to think. It's to teach them not to think, to stick to the narrative. Teachers' unions on both sides of the Atlantic are political campaign funds for left-wing political parties. What these schools are for is social engineering. They are taken over by an antichrist spirit. You must teach Darwinism. You cannot teach the alternative to it. You must teach little children homosexuality and lesbianism are normal. You cannot teach the alternative to it. Etc., etc., etc. It is there to mold people, not to think. Certainly, at least, not to think outside of the box into which they are placed. They hate charter schools. They hate homeschools. They hate faith-based private schools. Church-run schools, unless it's the C of E or the Roman Church. You know, the pedophile academies. They're all right. But a school that teaches God is the creator, a school that teaches Adam and Eve instead of Adam and Steve, that's not the narrative. But you have to understand, there is an antichrist spirit on back of this stuff. Just like Zechariah shows us what Nehemiah and Ezra and Haggai were seeing taking place historically, Zechariah pulls back the curtain and shows us what's happening in heaven at the same time. The book of Daniel shows us that the political events on the earth are a mere reflection of the conflicts in the heavenlies. So it happens to education. It happens through media. And social media. Again, not a new situation. This has gone on in newspaper dynasties to the time of Citizen Kane, if you've ever seen the film about William Randolph Hearst. It's not a new problem, but now it's perfected to an art form. There's no BBC News. There's no CNN News. The news is not reported. It is editorialized along the line of the biases the establishment wants people to subscribe to. Be it selling out to Europe or whatever. The news is not reported. It is editorialized. Or if there is something that threatens the interests of those who want to perpetuate the narrative, it's either underreported or ignored. A court in Europe decreeing a teacher is guilty for teaching historical fact because Muslims objected to it. In my youth, I was a radical socialist. It was different then. There were reasons. We saw in the States the Vietnam War. And while Americans were being drafted and sent to Vietnam with no right to vote yet, the American government was having détente with Russia and China, who were supplying the North Vietnamese with the hardware to kill Americans. At the same time, the American government was telling you to go fight the communists. They were same corporations making money. Telling you go fight the communists is your patriotic duty while they're trading with the communists. Young black guys would go to Vietnam and come back and not be able to go to university in Alabama or Mississippi because they were black after supposedly fighting for the country. This drove my generation to the left, you understand? There was a reason it happened. Now, eventually I saw through it. But I'd supported militant black organizations like the Black Panthers and things like this. I supported them when I was a teenager. Now understand this. A brief lesson in American history and, of course, British colonial history. Let's just be honest about it. In the American South, under slavery, a black was considered 3/5 human by law. So white plantation owners in the South, who were all Democrat, the Democratic Party was the party of slavery, could vote their slaves for the candidate of their choice, who would always be a Democrat. There were people called Uncle Toms, blacks who collaborated with the plantation owners, whose money and investment from the cotton trade was in England, in Britain. You see this in the film Gone with the Wind, as the back tells you some of the background of what was happening at that time. And that was it. This is how you vote if you're black. That's what they did. They voted how they were told. It was always Democrat, 3/5. Black men were breeding stock. They were studs. Send them back to the field. The United States outlawed the importation of slavery well before the American Civil War, so you had to breed them internally. That's what they did. Now, I'm not a Republican or a Democrat, but it was the Republicans, it was Abraham Lincoln who stopped this. You understand? It wasn't Democrats. After the Civil War, after emancipation, came Reconstruction. But it was the same thing. Slavery with a different name. You just found a way to lock a black guy up, put him on a chain gang. It just continued with a different name. Now, under Bill Clinton, the black American prison population tripled. What do you do with a black? Well, 3 out of 4 black American children are born out of wedlock. He's just a stud. The others are on welfare. He's just a breeding stock. Lock him up, put him in chains, handcuff him, send him back to jail. Can't get a job, you gave it to an illegal alien. So you get Uncle Toms. Barack Obama and these guys vote Democrat. It's the same thing that's always happened, you understand? It's the same thing. Hold the black man down, hold the Hispanic down, the American Indian. It's always the same game. But the narrative is, no, listen to Uncle Tom. This is getting worse. What's really odd is Hispanics and blacks who see through this and who try to warn and say, look, this is a lie. They're hated by the black establishment who have a vested interest as Uncle Tom's collaborating with this corruption. Well, it's the narrative. It's the media. Then you have the gentrification. San Francisco is a mess. But there are nice neighborhoods, and a lot of those nice neighborhoods used to be slums. Now, property developers buy those slums for a song or a pittance, often with the taxpayer subsidy, redevelop them as housing for people who work in Silicon Valley, which is in the suburbs of San Francisco. So instead of having people in the suburbs commuting to work in the city, you have people live in the city and commute to work in the suburbs. They have Google buses, and it's the opposite of traditional social economic environment. They work in the suburbs, live in the cities. Who gets forced out of these neighborhoods? Blacks and Hispanics. Who runs this system? Who funds it? George Soros, Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos, who not only runs Amazon, he owns the left-wing Washington Post. Why will billionaires, multi-billionaires, fund a left-wing political party? Why will the banksters of Wall Street want Clinton and Obama? Why? Because it's in their interest. If you can bamboozle people into following the narrative, oh no, they're for the rich, we're for the people, we're Antifa, it's all a lie. It's all a lie. There's super wealthy people pushing this. You think they're doing it because they're idealists? You think they're allowing people to come into the United States from Central America illegally to take jobs away from Mexican Americans because they're idealists? They want to pay the cheap wages. So the next thing that happens is victimization. You're the victim. You're in this situation because you're the victim. A child born out of wedlock in the United States of any race is much less likely to finish high school and much more likely to wind up in the criminal justice system at some point in his youth. You're the victim? That 3 out of 4 Afro-American children are born out of wedlock? The civil rights movement came out of Christianity. The Southern Christian Leadership Conference. These were people who had faith-based values. That's all gone. Now, you're the victim. South Africa. Apartheid has been over for 20 years or more. You're the victim. What's happening? African black African unemployment has more than doubled since the end of apartheid. Black underemployment is incalculable. Infant mortality has gone through the roof. Longevity has gone through the basement. Now, I was deeply, outspokenly opposed to apartheid. It was racist and unjust. But after 20 years of the ANC, the average black is far worse off. You know David Royal, yeah? We take care of AIDS kids in Africa. Uganda is the same. The tribalism is not the fault of European colonialists that you see in Kenya and Uganda and Tanzania. But you got to perpetuate the victim mentality. Now, countries that do not do that. Has anybody been to Singapore? What was Singapore in the late 1960s? A slum-cluttered island. What is Singapore now? It's unbelievable. Don't be the victim. Be the victor. Upward mobility, word study. Perpetuate the victim mentality. They do it in Northern Ireland with the Catholics. They do it in Northern Ireland with the Catholics. You perpetuate the victim mentality. As long as you make somebody think that they're the victim, perpetually, to the point where they don't have to be responsible for their own actions and own decisions, they will always remain the low man on the totem pole. And you'll always have their vote. Because you're showing sympathy to the victim. They redefine morality. Instead of you get married and you have children within the confines of wedlock, and you bring them up in a stable family and they have a father who's a role model and things like this, no, you destroy the family. Instead of morality being defined by personal righteousness, moral living, morality becomes redefined as your position on social policy. Are you green enough? Now, all these things I'm telling you seem like mere social commentary. They seem to be merely socio-political commentary. But understand something. There is a spirit on back of this stuff that is setting the stage for the Antichrist and false prophet. Remember, you'll be brought before magistrates and kings. We've pointed this out before. You replace legislative or parliamentary government with bureaucratic and judicial government. Bureaucratic, executive, and judicial government. It's not Parliament or Congress. It's executive orders ruling by fiat. Barack Obama made a treaty with Iran. Yeah, but it's not constitutional. The Senate has to approve the treaty. Oh, yeah, but he did it by fiat. Mr. Trump got rid of it. He shouldn't have done that. No, the treaty should have been made to begin with, unless it was approved by the Senate. Executive? What's happening with Theresa May? Is it parliamentary or is it executive? Bureaucratic. An entrenched bureaucracy making the real decisions in Brussels. And when it's challenged in court, the judicial. Judges who legislate from the bench, replacing the legislative and parliamentary. Now understand this, when you get to issues like pro-life, Mr. Trump, for instance, knows judges are going to decide these things. The American people never would have voted for same-sex marriage. The Supreme Court imposed it. Therefore, he's got to get conservative judges. You saw the thing with Kavanaugh over here in the news. There's a spiritual battle on back of that dealing with abortion and other things. The whole thing with moving the embassy to Jerusalem is another dimension. The next thing that happens in preserving the narrative, pay attention, is what George Orwell called newspeak, what we call political correctness. Call it what you want. You redefine things. I'll give you an example. Redefinition of language. Comes from something called deconstructionism, associated with the French Jewish philosopher in the 1960s. Somebody of considerable fame at that time, Jacques Derrida. Scientifically, male and female, term is sex. It has to do with chromosomal identity, X and Y. Scientifically, sex can only be chromosomally determined as X and Y. That's it. However, in the Greek language, to a degree in Latin language, and in certain other European languages, the masculine can take the feminine form, and the feminine can sometimes even take a masculine form. For instance, in Spanish, mapa, well, that should be a feminine word, but you don't say la mapa, you say el mapa. It takes the masculine article, doesn't it? El mapa. Es verdad. El mapa. In Greek, the masculine of rock is Petros, but Jesus is called in Corinthians the Petra. Gender is not to do with sex as a linguistic term. Gender is to do with the way a word is used in the construction or context of a sentence. Gender. We call it masculine, feminine, or in some languages masculine, feminine, or neuter, but it's not about X and Y. It's about the way a word is used in a particular context that determines if it's masculine or feminine. So, in deconstructionism, you replace the term sex with gender. Gender identity. You can't say sexual identity, because that would mean that the chromosomes in every cell in someone's body is going to determine if they're male or female. Being surgically altered to resemble someone of the natural opposite sex is not going to change the DNA in every cell of someone's body. Scientifically, you can't do it. So you do it with semantics. You do it with language. You make the term gender, a linguistic term, into a pseudo-scientific term. You understand? In deconstructionism of Derrida, it began as a literary form of literary criticism, where the assumptions about identity and truth are brought into question because words are thought to refer to other words. This gained momentum among left-wing intellectuals, particularly in France, and then began permeating the academic establishment of other countries, including Britain and America. Okay? You deconstruct the traditional meaning and give a new one. Well, what happens when this gets into the church? When people in word faith churches that follow the money preachers, when they use words like faith and victory and even prosper, they mean something quite different than the scripture means by those terms. Now, this also can relate to Gnosticism, where some people mean different things by the same terms than you do, but keeping it philosophical. They'll use terms with a different definition. You deconstruct traditionally held understandings of identity and truth. Well, constitutionally, deconstructionists hate the Constitution. They hate any kind of Constitution. The American Constitution, like the British Magna Carta, any of these things, they are all theistic documents. And it was understood at the time of their framing, drafting, and signing that they referred to the God of the Judeo-Christian scriptures. That has to be deconstructed. You understand? It could be the God as I understand him, or the God as I'm. Could be the God, it could be Buddha, it could be... This is Prince Charles. Prince Charles. It goes on. Now look. What happens again when it gets in to the church? Left-wing evangelicals. Has any of you heard of the American Tim Keller? Huh? You understand what this is? It's deconstructionism applied theologically as well as politically. You deconstruct the original understanding of the meaning. You attack the foundations. You teach it in schools. Dictatorial pastors, egomaniacs, religious narcissists, people like Steve Furtick. He's the worst I personally have seen, but he's not the only one. What's in back of this stuff? Well, the narrative. It's always the narrative. But it's not God's narrative. It's the narrative of the cosmos. It's the narrative of the cosmon. It is the narrative driven by a spirit of Antichrist that is setting the stage for the Antichrist. That's what it is. It relates to many things. To the zeitgeist, the spirit of the age. It relates to many things. It relates to the technosphere. It relates to many things, but it comes down to one basic thing that 1 John tells us. The cosmos and the cosmon. The system. The narrative. The myth treated as fact. In the first century, the demon-possessed bisexual emperor Caligula said his daughter was a son and arranged the marriage ceremony to a horse, legally recognized. You want to talk about animal rights? The difference is, in those days, although it was legally established, that's how far the Roman Empire went into depravity. Now, in the last days, or in these days, such things can to a degree be technologically facilitated. You understand? At least the illusion of it. There was no way then to make a male resemble a female surgically. Now they can do it. I can understand this. I used to be a man trapped in a woman's body, but then I was born. And I'm not the only one who said that, believe me. You understand what this is? Before John talks about Antichrist, and many Antichrists, and we will know it's the end when this Antichrist stuff begins to intensify and multiply in preparation for the arrival of the Antichrist and the false prophet. We know that this is preceded, verse 16, by the cosmos and the cosmon. Now there's something else. Do you know how many people doing this stuff, not all of them, but a disproportionately large percentage of them are Jewish? Now they will not tell you, anti-Semites will not tell you that the people opposing it, like Ben Shapiro and Dennis Prager and Mark Levin and Michael Savage, they won't tell you that the people who are opposing it and warning against it are disproportional numbers Jewish also. They won't tell you that. The anti-Semites will just say Jews are doing this. You understand? Yet there's no question. The same as there's a disproportionate number of Jews warning against it, there's a disproportionate number of left-wing Jews doing it. Soros being one, Zuckerberg. There's a final thing they are doing now. Deplatformization. And I will leave with this. In deplatformization, Norwegian cruises have done this. MasterCard has done this. Facebook has done this. It gets worse and worse. So many of them are doing it. Universities are doing this. You deprive dissenting voices of a platform to put across the opposing point of view. The fact that Darwinism is not scientific, you can't say that. It's not the narrative. You cannot have a scientist who will challenge it, deplatform them. Antifa are the most fascist people in the world. They're anti-free speech. They do not want intelligent debate. They want people reacting emotionally. Not people who think, but people who've been conditioned by the school system not to think. The universities want people who can't think. So they ban conservative speakers, pro-life speakers, anything like this. Of two things we may be sure. The Menelaus effect. Menelaus the Jew collaborated, as Daniel predicted, with Antiochus. Major picture of the Antichrist, the abomination. Menelaus is coming back big time. You will see a betrayal of the Jewish people and of Israel facilitated by left-wing Jews. It's already begun in America. It is already begun in the United States. And you will see a betrayal of the body of Christ, not just by left-wing so-called Christians, but by left-wing professing evangelicals. Gary Burge, Stephen Sizer, Tim Keller, and others, and more to come. That is what is happening. It'll go against Israel. It'll go against the church, the true church. The left-wing Jews will attack traditional Jewish identity, Jewish preservation. The same thing will happen within the church. Our identity, our very identity in Christ will be challenged and is being challenged. By people like Steve Chalk in this country. It's happening. No, there's a reason. There's a reason where it says, before this Antichrist, it's prefaced, love not the cosmos, neither the cosmon. Understand this. It is the world's system. It is demonically operated. The world is in the power of the wicked one. When you read a newspaper, and don't read one, read this. You cannot believe them. You can't believe them, but you can believe this. This you can believe. The cosmos and the cosmos. This is the reality. These trends you see in society, in governments, Brexit, the hatred of Trump, all these things, they are reflections of spiritual conflicts, and they all concern us. Every one of these things concerns us. We are supposed to understand this. You can't understand the cosmos unless you understand the cosmon. Tonight, in a nutshell, I hope by the grace of God, I've done my best to make sure you understand it, to explain it to you. We are not to be naive about these things. If you've watched This Week in Prophecy, our last one, it hinged on a verse in Daniel, and then we'll go to sleep. Turn with me to Daniel 2, please. Verse 21, it's he who changes the times and the epochs, that's the Lord. He removes kings and establishes kings. He's responsible with governments. He gives wisdom to wise men and knowledge to men of understanding. ultimately, the Lord is the Lord of these events. It doesn't happen unless he allows it. Sometimes he causes it. But he wants us. He wants you and he wants me to be wise men and women. He gives us wisdom. Jesus is our wisdom. And knowledge to men and women of understanding. This is not just an academic lecture. Make sure you understand this. The cosmos and the cosmon. God bless. Have a good night.